The history of America's survival is written in the blood of the people whose devotion knew no limits. They came from all over America when their country called. They learned to fight and never flinched from facing combat. Some lived to see the end of the war, but many made the ultimate sacrifice. For their efforts, they were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest honor a grateful America can award its military heroes for acts of courage, self-sacrifice, and dedication above and beyond the call of duty. They are all heroes, and these are their stories. Richard Bong entered cadet training in 1941 after graduating from college and became a pilot and a second lieutenant early in 1942. That same year, Lieutenant Bong was among the first fighter pilots to arrive in Darwin, Australia, as a member of the 49th Fighter Group flying P-38s. It didn't take long for him to become well known in the skies over the southwestern Pacific. Soon after arriving, Bong had 8 victories to his credit and was leader of the 9th Fighter Squadron. As the combined American forces slowly pushed the enemy back toward the Philippines, Bong flew cover for light and heavy bombers, taking on enemy aircraft wherever he found them. With 28 confirmed combat victories, Bong returned to the United States for advanced gunnery training in April 1944. Shortly thereafter, he was back in Australia as a gunnery instructor for 5th Air Force fighter pilots. At the same time, the battle for Leyte was raging. As the Navy battered the island, American forces rushed to rebuild airstrips to receive fighter planes. Their efforts were hindered by enemy aircraft raiding day and night. But Richard Bong was there, flying missions every day and winning victories as he eliminated the enemy one by one. "12 times the Japanese sent convoys to reinforce their stronghold at Ormoc Bay, and 12 times the 5th Air Force turned them back. The last Japanese convoy to be hit was in December of 1944. Richard Bong now had 38 combat victories. On the afternoon of December 12, 1944, in front of a guard of honor consisting of 12 pilots, each of whom had 12 or more air combat victories, General Douglas MacArthur pinned the Medal of Honor on Major Richard Bong. In the week that followed the ceremony, Major Bong shot down 2 more enemy aircraft, bringing his total to 40. After more than 2 years and hundreds of missions, Major Bong returned to the United States in January of 1945 as the leading American ace. His total of 40 victories stands as the record for World War II. He was representative of the highest caliber of young Americans who served their country. Richard Bong, a hero. In the late 1930s, James H. Howard entered the Navy as a flying cadet and became a naval aviator with the rank of ensign. In the summer of 1941, when General Claire Chennault was recruiting volunteer pilots for his Flying Tigers, Howard resigned his commission and signed up. Born in China to American parents, he wanted to help turn back the Japanese tide that was overwhelming his birthplace. After intensive training, the volunteer fighter pilots went into action. They took on large flights of enemy bombers and fighters, exacting a heavy toll. One of the prime enemy targets was Rangoon, gateway to the Burma Road over which vital supplies traveled to China. The Flying Tigers repeatedly inflicted heavy damage on the enemy, forcing them to turn back. In July 1942, the Flying Tigers were disbanded. Howard returned to the United States. He accepted a captain's commission in the Army Air Corps and returned to active duty. After various assignments, Howard joined the 354th Fighter Group, the first to arrive in England equipped with P-51 Mustangs. Because of his combat experience, Howard was frequently assigned to lead groups into combat, even when he was not the ranking officer. In December of 1943, Colonel Howard led his fighters deep into Germany, accompanying the heavy bombers on their missions to Kiel, Ludwigshafen, and Bremen. In 1944, a large-scale mission was scheduled for January 11th. More than 600 heavy bombers would penetrate deep into Germany, 90 miles southwest of Berlin. The target was the Focke-Wulf aircraft plant. Finally, the day arrived. The bombers were loaded and ready. Fighters were equipped with extra wing tanks that could be jettisoned before they entered combat. Initial penetration of air zones over the continent went as planned. The lead element of bombers would be escorted to the target and then back to England with fighter cover all of the way. The second and third elements of bombers would be escorted to within 70 miles of the target, then picked up again and protected during withdrawal. The German command had learned by now to wait and see where a strike was really going before committing their fighter planes. The weather turned ugly, and the call went out to scrub the attack and return to England. However, some of the squadrons never received the recall order. More than 130 bombers proceeded to their target. Colonel Howard led a fighter group supplying top cover for the first element, and as they penetrated deeper into German territory, more and more American fighters turned back because their fuel was running low. Fighter resistance in the target area was heavy. During combat, Howard became separated from his group and lost considerable altitude. After shooting down one enemy plane, he climbed back toward the bomber formation. About 30 German fighters were attacking his bombers, and not a single friendly fighter plane was in sight. For his act of courage, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, making him the first fighter pilot in the European theater of operations to be awarded his nation's highest decoration. The citation read in part, "While Colonel Howard could have waited to attempt to assemble his group before engaging the enemy, he chose instead to attack single-handed a formation of more than 30 German airplanes. With utter disregard for his own safety, he immediately pressed home attacks for some 30 minutes, during which time he destroyed 3 more enemy planes and probably destroyed and damaged others not confirmed. His skill, courage, and intrepidity on this occasion set an example of heroism which will be an inspiration to the armed forces of the United States." He retired as a brigadier general from the Air Force Reserve after having served with distinction in peace as well as war. Winner of our nation's highest award, James H. Howard, a hero. During World War II, the 8th Air Force based in England was often the workhorse of the Allied Air Command. Flying B-17s at first and later B-24s, the men of the 8th frequently carried their bombs deep into enemy territory to destroy German aircraft and armament production centers. On July 1st, 1943, elements of the 8th Air Force landed in Benghazi, Libya, near the North African coast. Joining elements of the 9th Air Force, they prepared for a daring and vitally important mission. A mission that would cost many lives, yet stand as one of the finest examples of courage and self-sacrifice in the entire war. Every man who flew on that mission was decorated for his heroism, and no less than 5 men were awarded the Medal of Honor. Of those, only Colonel John Kane and Colonel Leon Johnson lived to receive their nation's highest tribute. This is not only their story, but the story of each man who took part in burning Ploiești oil. The formulating of the plan to deprive the Nazis of the rich Romanian oil fields at Ploiești began months in advance. Once assembled on the Libyan desert, the Special Strike Force began 30 days of intensive training for what they hoped would be a devastating surprise attack. The plan was to approach the heavily defended target area at extremely low altitude to avoid detection for as long as possible. In a rehearsal of the raid, with full bomb loads, the strike force passed over a simulated target area in the desert in approximately 2 minutes. As 0 hour approached, every man knew that it would be a tough mission, 2,400 miles round trip. Ground crews labored throughout the night. The planes would have to carry extra fuel and extra ammo to fight off enemy aircraft, since there could be no Allied fighter protection. In addition, each aircraft carried 2 boxes of incendiary devices to be dropped by hand on the target area. At dawn, August 1st, the great adventure began. Colonel Kane and Colonel Johnson each led one of the 5 main bomber groups into the air and out over the Mediterranean. Everything was proceeding as planned. Then the unforeseen happened while crossing the mountains of Yugoslavia. In dense fog, the 5 bomber groups became separated. Those flying at higher levels picked up a tailwind and moved well ahead of the others. Once over Romania, the strike force dropped so low they could not be detected by radar. They met no enemy fighter resistance as they closed in, but because of the separation over the mountains, only the lead group had the vital element of surprise in their favor when they reached Ploiești. The trailing group, comprised of Colonel Kane's and Colonel Johnson's elements, arrived several minutes later over the target area. By then, the enemy's defenses had been totally alerted. Flames, roaring higher than the aircraft were flying, added to their difficulties, but rather than turn back from such a vital mission, Kane and Johnson elected to lead their planes through the blazing inferno and across the specified target at minimum altitude. Some planes were hit miles before reaching their targets, but kept flying forward into the flames even though their punctured fuel tanks were streaming gasoline. Kane's men fired 2,400 rounds of ammunition in 90 seconds over the target, often firing upward at anti-aircraft units on tops of buildings. Despite the hazard of oil fires, exploding delayed action bombs, and attacks by enemy fighters, Colonel Johnson delivered his payload right on target. 9 planes of this group were lost in the hail of enemy bullets. At one time, 3 separate bomb groups were over the target simultaneously, flying in different directions at low altitude. Enemy observers said it was the greatest exhibition of flying skills they had ever seen. They thought it was planned that way. 41 planes were lost in the mission, but the enemy's vital Ploiești oil field had been severely crippled. Without enough fuel to return to Benghazi, Colonel Kane was forced to lead his group to a landing strip on the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean. Soon after, Colonel Kane received the Medal of Honor at Cairo. Colonel Johnson received his Medal of Honor in England. John Kane and Leon Johnson, heroes. During the historic Casablanca Conference in 1943, a number of decisions emerged that accelerated the downfall of the Nazi warmaker. One decision was a program of combined bombing operations. The RAF was to continue its night bombing attacks, while the American Air Force would concentrate on daylight precision bombing of selected targets. Around-the-clock destruction of enemy industry, transportation, and supply sources would bring the Third Reich to its knees. Combined bombing operations had been underway 6 weeks when Flight Officer John Morgan made his fateful flight. His mission was to wipe out the factory that produced the German Focke-Wulf 190 fighters. Located about 90 miles southeast of Berlin, it would be the deepest daylight raid yet attempted. A force of 120 B-17 Flying Fortresses, some equipped with extra fuel tanks for the long, dangerous flight, took off from scattered English bases loaded with bombs and ammo. There was seemingly no element of surprise as the planes reached their rendezvous point in the sky. Their progress was marked on German radar, and the news flashed to waiting Luftwaffe groups. However, the direction of the flight toward the much-bombed Kiel-Hamburg area was a feint. Right on cue, 39 of the B-17s broke away and began their perilous journey inland. Even before reaching the German border, the B-17 on which Flight Officer Morgan served as co-pilot was attacked by a large force of enemy fighters. They knocked out the oxygen system to the tail, waist, and radio gun positions. A frontal attack shattered the windshield, and a .30 caliber shell hit the pilot in the head, leaving him in a semi-conscious state. He fell over, tightly clamping his arms about the controls. Immediately, Morgan wrestled the controls from the wounded man. By sheer strength, he pulled the airplane back into formation despite the resistance of the confused, injured pilot. Elsewhere in the plane, the waist, tail, and radio gunners had lost consciousness from lack of oxygen. Morgan, no longer hearing their guns fire, believed they had bailed out. In the face of this desperate situation, he made his decision to continue the flight to the target. For 2 hours, he flew in formation with one hand at the controls and the other holding off the clutching grip of the delirious pilot until the navigator entered the steering compartment and relieved the situation, making the completion of the mission possible. It was a costly victory, but the enemy paid a bigger price. Recon photos showed the amazing accuracy of the bombing. The enemy's vital Focke-Wulf plant would be out of commission for a long time. Newly promoted Lieutenant John C. Morgan was awarded the Medal of Honor for his miraculous and heroic performance. The citation read in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty while participating on a bombing mission over occupied continental Europe. John C. Morgan, a hero." On January 11, 1945, two P-51s of the 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron returned from a mission. As they came in over Mindoro's Strip, the lead pilot, Captain Arthur Shomo, executed a victory roll indicating that he had destroyed an enemy plane. Ground crews looked up, surprised as he performed another victory roll. The men began to count 2 planes down. When Captain Shomo executed his 3rd and 4th victory roll, it brought out the brass. By the time he was making the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th roll, no one would believe it. 7 victories seemed impossible. He was just showing off. Showing off, perhaps, but with good reason. In August 1941, William Arthur Shomo of Jeannette, Pennsylvania, was accepted for pilot training. By 1942, he had earned his wings and was commissioned as second lieutenant. He was anxious to see combat, but various assignments kept him in the United States, among them anti-submarine patrol duty off the coast of Louisiana. Finally, in 1943, he was assigned to the 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron in the Southwest Pacific, where the Allies were pushing the Japanese back island by island. Crucial aircraft supported each invasion. Control of the sky meant that beachheads would be secured without the fierce resistance and loss of life that was paid for places like Guadalcanal. Still, Lieutenant Shomo's only action was what he considered routine photographic missions. In August 1944, Shomo's squadron moved to Biak Island and then to Morotai in mid-October. The 82nd was outfitted with new planes, a reconnaissance version of the P-51 fighter. On 9 January 1945, the 82nd moved to Mindoro. 2 days later, Captain Shomo was assigned another reconnaissance mission, photographing enemy aerodromes on the northern tip of Luzon. With his wingman, Lieutenant Lipscoe, a former cowboy from Texas, Shomo took off. They flew low, only about 200 feet above the Cagayan River, heading for the Apari aerodrome. Suddenly, about 2,500 feet above them, Captain Shomo spotted a formation of enemy fighters flying cover for a Japanese twin-engine bomber. There must have been VIPs in the bomber to rate such a large escort. Shomo and his wingman pointed their P-51s toward the sky and roared upward to the attack. This was the combat he had trained for. On his first pass, Captain Shomo got a fighter and Lipscomb shot down another one. The Japanese scattered. In a climbing turn, Shomo came back through the formation and another enemy fighter exploded before his guns. The enemy tried to regroup their planes, but Shomo and his wingman pressed the attack, relentlessly diving, firing, climbing, turning, until there were no longer any enemy planes to shoot at. For some time, the recon team flew around taking pictures of their accomplishment. Captain Shomo had shot down 6 Japanese fighter planes, as well as the bomber carrying the important enemy personnel. In all, the remains of 11 planes lay burning beneath them. Indeed, Captain Shomo wasn't just showing off. On 7 April 1945, he was awarded the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. William Shomo, a hero.